Looking to streamline your practice? Check out Therapy Notes, rated #1 among mental health professionals. Therapy Notes offers all the tools you need to thrive, whether you're a solo clinician or part of a group practice. Try it free for 2 months with promo code MODERN.
Therapists, do you know if your clients are getting successfully reimbursed with the super bills you give them? Insurance can be confusing to navigate, leading clients to quit therapy early. Join hundreds of therapists who use Thrizer as their go-to resource for successful out-of-network reimbursements, helping them get and keep clients in their practice. Visit join.thrizer.com/modern therapist to learn more and get started.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about the things that go on in our practices, the things that go on in our fields, and the ways that we end up navigating just being therapists. And after our interview with Angela Caldwell, we had a continuing conversation with her where she had made a comment about, I've seen a lot of therapists using their therapist chair as kind of a pulpit to talk about whatever is important to the therapist and not necessarily being in the right space for the clients. And Katie and I have been talking about this off air and decided to take this conversation out there because one of the things that we have done is through our work, through our podcast library sorts of things, and even workshops, is really encourage people to lean into who you are, lean into being able to attract clients that are more likely going to succeed in working with you. And throughout the years, whenever we've done this kind of a workshop or had this kind of a conversation, I've had this fear. What if people listen to us too well and they do this to a point where it becomes all about them? And we wanted to navigate that conversation, maybe clarify some things, talk about how we can still do this in a healthy way, but maybe in ways that this is also not going well. So, Katie, what were your kind of initial thoughts on this topic?
You're referencing our brand called you workshop / podcast episode / conversation. So I will link to those things in the show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. I think you're also talking about when we lean into ourselves and what makes us who we are and how we want to operate as a therapist and kind of protective self-care, those types of things. We are potentially making our career more sustainable. We're working with people who are better aligned, but we also may be working from a place of bias. We might also be working from a place of lack of access or inclusion. We may be discriminating. And we also may be putting undue influence onto our clients based on what we think is best for them or what we think is best for the world. And I've worried about this quite a bit, but I also come to this more kind of philosophical place of I don't know that we can completely mitigate this risk of bias or discrimination or those types of things because we're human beings. And sometimes we don't have enough ability or time to do introspection or those types of things. So I'm looking forward to this conversation because I feel like it's one that is overdue. It seems like the pendulum has completely swung from blank slate to, I'm going to go way too far, but influencer, super authentic therapist. And so to me, I feel like there's a place where we can both be ourselves, be real people, bring ourselves into the room and not go too far into this place of pushing into this is how I work and this is how you must operate and this is what you must do. And if you're my client, then you must believe this. To me, that was one of the things that I started thinking about is when people get these really strong niches or brands or whatever you want to call it, and they have a very particular type of outcome that they typically get, and they're trying to grow their audiences and they're trying to get more and more folks into the space, is there an influence that is happening that is not healthy, that is not therapeutic, that is not in the best interest of the client? And so to me, I get concerned that the brand called you taken too far is creating a practice of discipleship.
Anything can turn into a pendulum.
Sure.
We started our conversations around the pendulum swing away from blank slate sort of stuff, and maybe just with some more maturity over the years. I see reasons that therapists can utilize that as a tool. Like, this is not a prescribed, like, everybody needs to do it that way. And I think to give younger versions of ourselves the permission to say, this is not the only option for how you practice. This is another way that you can practice in addition to that. And maybe it was just trying to make a name for ourselves or trying to ruffle feathers in the community that
Us? What? Trying to make a name for ourselves? Ruffle feathers? That's unheard of.
and that's the influence that social media puts on us. We were trying to make a name for ourselves, to get a following on a podcast kind of thing that we, at least saying it out loud, we both are not out there to get every single therapist to listen to all of our podcast episodes. You totally should share us with all of your friends and get them all to listen to all of but that's not really our stated goal. Our goal is to have the ongoing conversations, and people who want to join along are welcome and give us our feedback, whatever. But part of being in the crowd and trying to stand out is making more and more of these bigger things.
There's that element of this, that there's a public persona that is pushing a particular outcome and that influences how the practice looks. But then there's also what ends up happening in the therapy room, even in spaces with folks who are not influencers. Maybe they've got their social justice policies and all the things that they want on their website, but then it becomes an active part of their treatment with every client. And I think that's where I go to a place of, okay, there's this element where we let people know who we are. We have the website, filter them out and do those things. And then there's also folks who are just seeking therapy and they think you might be a good enough match that may want something a little bit different. And so it's, how much do we filter out the folks who don't want to do the work that we want to do? And how much do we provide access to folks who just want a therapist and they think that you would be good enough, and you take their insurance or you have a fee that they want to pay or whatever it is? I think there's that element of what is our responsibility and how far are we going in trying to refine our caseload to that ideal, perfect client every single time.
I want to expand on both of the points that you're bringing up here. So I'm going to start with the outcomes one, because part of advertising or stating things in this way is it doesn't necessarily come across as a way for clients to get to their own outcomes. It's kind of advertising that this is the only outcome that I practice, and it doesn't necessarily lend space to this is amongst the options that we can arrive at. But it's kind of a guaranteed outcome sort of thing. Some people are going to want the therapists who do the DEI statements as part of their work, the social justice issues kinds of things. Some people are going to want the Christian therapists who advertise themselves in that way. And I still firmly and strongly believe that the brand called you sort of stuff should encourage people to describe how it is to work with them.
Yes.
The part of this that I am wanting to pull that pendulum back a little bit is that these are possibilities of things that we can do in our work, but it's not the only way that we do things.
My sense of what I believe the responsibility of a therapist who has that specialty might hold to is if I'm going to have a strong brand, a strong niche, I need to, in my mind, in my opinion, have the ability to assess, is this person the right fit? Is this person, do they have other options? Are there things that I should be aware of because they're in the same field? The problem is this, it's the presenting problem that I want to be aware of and not so focused on the specific outcome or the specific brand of treatment. So if we look at that, I think part of it is getting so niche down, so focused, so the message so refined that it's limiting to one solution. And I feel like that's the part that I get worried about, is that folks get pulled into these situations where the person may be totally upfront about what they do, but they're not being exposed to the other options. I think I'm saying the same thing that you were saying before, but I feel like there's this element of trying to say what should be done instead, which is, as a clinician, we can have a very strong way that we work, but we can't get so down the path that we don't have the ability to assess and provide other resources and other options.
Therapy Notes seamlessly integrates scheduling, documentation, and billing into one easy-to-use platform. Plus, enjoy features like secure messaging, e-prescribe, group telehealth, and more. With 24/7 live customer support, you'll get answers to your questions anytime, anywhere.
No matter your field or specialty, Therapy Notes is dedicated to helping you care more and worry less. So use the promo code MODERN today to try it free for 2 months.
And I think part of what's missing in therapists who present this way are some of the client stories that we see when they're either firing therapists because they're not giving some of these other options. One of the crucial things that is missing in all of this is evaluating if it's actually effective for the client.
Yeah.
Because there are situations, and as this episode is airing, I'm sure that a lot of people are having lots of clients talk about politics and elections, at least here in the US, and having to navigate working with clients who may hold different political beliefs and getting sucked into conversations about politics. Now, bear with me. I know a lot of DEI-informed clinicians who will also point out the systems of oppression that end up being part of where it leads into discussions about politics. There are things that are political in how one party or the other may evaluate things, but being able to pull that from I'm going to vote for the guy from the blue party, or I'm going to vote for the person from the red party, things still ends up needing to be able to navigate around. Well, there are still systemic issues that affect one client or another. And being able to confront that is being able to be political in therapy, which is good and very well informed, but not necessarily making therapy about politics. And it's that little nuance, which is which one of those two is actually benefiting the client. And as Angela was talking about in the interview that we did with her, it's being able to help move that conversation along and listen to people, to how they arrived at those viewpoints or those standpoints that actually does help in that therapeutic sense, rather than it just being an entire session talking about what's in the news cycle.
When you said being political in therapy versus talking about politics in therapy, I was trying to kind of figure out what that meant. And I'm still grappling with that, the differences that you're trying to make. But the first one is, if we just sit and talk about the news cycle, unless the client in front of us that feels helpful to them and they want to process their responses, that can feel like we're dictating the conversation, or that we're not talking about anything that's actually helpful. It's just like, what is the crisis of the day? What are the things? I want to dig a little deeper into what you mean by being political in therapy, because some folks, I think, have taken that to mean making an impact on this person in front of you to be more informed, to have a more enlightened perspective, which is very biased. Each person has their own perspective on that. And so trying to influence your client to think more like you could be categorized as being political in therapy. Now, I want to make sure that we link to Dr. Travis Heath's episode in the show notes. So I'll do that. I may even try to make it the throwback episode because I think it's such a great episode. But I think he talks about some of that. So we don't need to replay that ground. But what distinction are you making around being political in therapy versus pushing your viewpoints or politics onto your client?
I think it's becoming harder and harder to take things out of the political climate in what's in the news cycle to be able to really separate out and talking with clients. Here's some of the limitations of resources that you have that affect your mental health. To me, that is talking about systemic pressures, and that is talking about opportunities and access and those kinds of things. That is not talking about politics. It's talking about things that are political in nature.
Okay.
It's not saying you should vote for one party or another. That's politics. It's talking about the everyday impacts out of systems that are larger than just what one person, and trying to look at things from a different viewpoint might, how many times have we said on the episode, on the podcast, you can't CBT your way just out of poverty. Like, you've eventually got to look at how poverty ends up affecting mental health. To me, those are things that are political and can look at what is actually available for you to be able to change your situation, to address your mental health issues. What are some of the limitations that you run into on a systemic level? To me, those are political, and it's being able to look at client stories in the way that Dr. Heath did, that helps to help them navigate that world around them and see from a different perspective. That, to me, is not about politics, but it's still very political.
And it requires a lot of introspection, or it will be very flavored by bias. I think you and I are similar, in our belief systems and how we operate in the world. I think we are probably too aligned to make a super interesting podcast. But I think both of us hold the space for other perspectives. And so I'm going to do that right now. When we look at systemic racism and oppression and the systems of oppression, we have clients in the world who will think that that is us pushing our political views on them. And so, to me, even in being able to be political, some of our viewpoints are not neutral in the current environment. I would argue they're true. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not true, that they're up for debate even, but I have potentially clients who would see that as being up for debate. And so if I'm pushing into these systems and how the systems impact you, and if I'm looking at systems of oppression or systems of poverty or those types of things, a client who's impacted by oppression or poverty or those stressors might feel relief at hearing that, and might be able to open up a conversation, or may dismiss it and say, yeah, I hear you, whatever, feel relieved that you at least see it, but want to move on to something else and we can continue the conversation. If I'm looking at someone who sits with a lot of privilege and I'm talking about these systems of oppression and where their privilege comes in and challenging them on those things, that is also political. It's pretty much the same thing, just a reversed role. And that client may not want to do that. I have clients who are absolutely willing and want to do that type of work, looking at their intersectional identities and how their privilege impacts how they see the world. And I have clients who would not want to do that and would feel very put upon. I don't even know if that's not a great word, but they would feel pressured in that conversation and would not be able to engage in it. And so I think even the concept of being a political therapist or being political in therapy needs a lot of assessment. Now, there's lots of conversations we have about how to start those conversations to determine where folks are in their development as an anti-racist or any of those things. And so I think those assessments need to be had. But when you're saying, let's not tell somebody how to vote or let's not talk about politics, like it's even more nuanced than that, I believe.
While super bills can be helpful for your private pay clients, they don't help clients access therapy today. When clients see you weekly or biweekly, they may be out hundreds of dollars before they receive reimbursements 4 to 6 weeks later, which can be financially straining on them. Thriser's mission is to help clients access therapy today by working to get them instantly reimbursed for out-of-network sessions.
First, you can help your prospects instantly verify their out-of-network benefits with Thriser, providing them complete transparency on the cost of therapy ahead of their first session. Then, just by charging your clients via Thriser's payment platform, you can offer them courtesy claim submission and end-to-end claim management, and even let your clients just pay a coinsurance for sessions, similar to in-network copays, to skip the reimbursement wait entirely. How? Thriser covers the rest of your fees so you get paid in full up front, and they wait for a reimbursement on your client's behalf.
Thriser also has a super bill uploads feature, which is completely free for therapists. If you'd like to instead offer your clients a resource to manage their own super bills, Thriser manages all claims end to end, so you and your clients don't need to deal with any of the insurance stress. Visit join.thriser.com/modern therapist and use our promo code Modern Therapists to start your free trial and receive waived fees for your first $2,500 in payments. And what you're speaking to is well-trained therapists can navigate and adjust based on clients who have differing feedback, differing viewpoints that, as you're talking about, extremely different levels of SES statuses and privileges that might come in. And it comes back to the point of being able to ask the clients, is this approach effective? Is this working for you? Are you getting out of therapy what you want? And being able to tailor that to clients rather than just kind of taking this approach that is all clients must have to think in a way that aligns with my own personal values.
The argument I've heard, and this is more for why folks may not work with particular clients or do this work in this way, and maybe I'm overstating that part of it, is that it's not safe as a person in a marginalized identity to have a client not open to doing that type of work or not open to those types of comments. I think that's fair. I think it also is something that is a real challenge if we're trying to figure out how to get more folks into therapy, have access to therapy, but also see all types of folks as therapists and understand different folks more personally. I don't even know what the right word is, where if we are interacting with someone who is different from us and we're able to navigate some of these conversations with finesse, not with a hammer, that can improve a lot of the stuff that many progressive therapists and anti-racist therapists want to work on. But if it's something where I'm coming from a place of protection and I understand that, it could be that other people need to step up, and that's fine. But it could be that it's limiting the impact that some therapists can have.
The word that's coming to mind is when it becomes an ultimatum for the client is where it becomes problematic. And I think rather than just kind of repeating ourselves over and over again, it's the impact on the client that this has and the impact on people who may be potentially coming into a practice that this ends up becoming something that is biased, is something that is, you have to think this way rather than it's, here's how I work. Some of the things that we do in our group practice is we're evaluating for suicide every single session. And We've had a handful of clients over the years that, especially in working with kids, when we've said, hey, we're going to talk about suicide. We want to make this into a space where if you're ever feeling this way, you know that we're ready to handle these conversations. And we've had some parents bristle over that over the years. Why are you introducing this idea to our kids? And our reasons are it works pretty effectively. If 3, 4, 6 months later, a kid is responding with, hey, remember in the first session when you were talking about people who want to kill themselves? I'm kind of feeling that way. We found it to be more effective to open those conversations. That is how it is to work with us.
Yeah.
These are the kinds of things that I think you and I mean in Brand Called You, is these are aspects that we can help with. This is the personality kinds of aspects that end up really being able to embrace who we are and how we work. We're going through some office changes in our suite right now, and due to some shuffling of things around, I ended up seeing a client in one of the other therapist's offices recently, and I was told, this office doesn't really suit you. This one looks like it's more made for Instagram, and that just doesn't go with how you casually just are introducing more ideas. This feels almost a little bit confining in here. When we're talking about Brand Called You kind of stuff, it's being able to be yourself, but it's being able to push on the gas pedal when you need to with the clients that are really going to resonate with that. And it's being able to adapt and change to the clients that still end up in your practice and seeing you anyway.
So I want to go one step further and talk about the clients who really resonate and who you stepped on the gas with, all of those things. And they are completely aligned. They love what you're saying. They want to be just like you. I think we have a responsibility to them as well to pull back and really, whether it's strengthen their ego strength or empower them or whatever, to come to that conclusion themselves from a place of full awareness. I don't know if that's possible, but some mechanism. I think about the work that I've done with my therapist over many, many years. And I was working in community mental health at the time. I was super burned out. I was very exhausted and, all the pieces. I was asked to resign and didn't know what to do. But in the back of my head, my therapist was continuing to talk about the joys of private practice and wasn't saying you should do it, but certainly was, commenting on the wrongness of being in community mental health. And I wonder to this day how much of an impact that it had on where I landed. If I was working with a clinician who also had stayed in community mental health and had a small side therapy practice, would I still be in community mental health because of where they sat? I'm happy where I ended up, so I think it worked out for the best. But I recognize that the people around us have a huge impact on what we do, and a therapist sometimes even more so. And I want to just mark that as something to consider, as well as even folks who resonate with us. We need to make sure that they're not following us without critically assessing if that's the path they want to be on.
I think my final point on this is being able to really evaluate if branding yourself in this way or working in this way in therapy is more about showing the importance of your values than it is about what the clients are actually asking for. And I think that we can be involved politically in things. And as I've said on this episode, we can be political in our actions. But when it becomes the point about it being about us rather than it being about what the clients are actually asking for, that's where it becomes problematic.
I want to add on to that point too, because I was thinking when you were talking about that, when someone is in a therapy relationship as a client with someone who has a very strong political stance or perspective or whatever it is, it can be very challenging to voice the opposition, so to speak. It can be, as a client, difficult to say, hey, I hear that you believe this, and my thought process is very different. Now, some clients are great at arguing and doing all this stuff. So I'm not speaking to every single client needs protection from a strong therapist. But there is that element of, are we not opening conversations? Are we not allowing things in just by being who we are and being who we are publicly? And so, as always, we go back to meet the client where they are, open the space for them to do their own thinking and their own thought processes, make sure the goals are aligned with them and what they want. And if it is somebody that you truly can't work with because of your own safety or not being able to get to where the client is and try to help them walk through their own thought process, maybe it is important to refer out. But before you do, listen to our episode on whether or not it's discrimination.
We'd love to hear your feedback on this. You can follow us on our social media, let us know there, join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group, to continue on the conversations. And you can check our show notes out at mtsgpodcast.com. And until next time, I'm Curt Widhelm with Katie Vernoy.
A final thanks again to our partner Therapy Notes, the highest rated practice management solution for behavioral health. Don't forget that you can use promo code MODERN for 2 free months when you sign up.
Super bills and reimbursement waits are not a reliable solution for out-of-network clients. With just a click of the button, you can offer courtesy claim submission and end-to-end claim management support, and even allow them to skip the reimbursement wait altogether with Thrizer. Visit join.thrizer.com/modern therapist and use our code Modern Therapist to start your free trial today.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.